Hi and welcome back. Tonight I want to take a look at Samuel R Delany's Babel-17. When this novel came out, it won the 1966 Nebula Award for the best novel, which it co-won actually with Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon, which we reviewed earlier on this channel. So the book begins with a bit of world building, and what we find is that Earth is in this alliance of planets that have been invaded by this force simply known and referred to as the invaders throughout the novel. And what we find is that the alliance has been experiencing some accidents, and what as the military gets involved, what they've noticed is that those accidents have been preceded by what appears to be an encoded or encrypted message. So the military takes notice, and it doesn't take them long to realize that these are not just mere accidents, but acts of sabotage. So they start to get their specialist teams to try to crack the encoding, the encryption, and they basically come to a halt. And they reach out to the most unlikely of people to actually come and try to crack the code, which they've labeled as Babel-17. So that's where the book gets its name. And they've reached out to a very interesting person in Elijah Wong. Now, Elijah Wong was an interesting character in the book. She's basically this novelist, poet slash, what would you call her? She's almost like a reality TV star, right? She's this poet. She's well known, famous, but she's also got a very strong sense of people, so she can read people really well, and she's sort of borderline empath and telepathic. So the general in the book, who's is in charge of this military response to these acts of sabotage, reach out to Elijah Wong, and it doesn't take Elijah long at all to determine that this is actually not an encrypted message, but a language all on itself. And we get sort of a bit of an interesting, almost unbelievable response from the general, where Elijah basically asks him that, hey, if you want me to help, the only way I can really help is for you to hand over all the knowledge, all the information, all the intelligence you have on this code, so I can then start to decipher it and understanding the language behind it. And the general does something which is, I think, unbelievable, at least in my mind, that he hands over this information to Elijah Wong almost without question. And I sort of found that a little bit hard to swallow in the book. So the book is written in multiple parts. I think it's 4 or 5 parts, and the first part is really around the message, and then them finding this encrypted message which they've called Babel-17 and reaching out to Elijah Wong for support and help. The second part of the book is all about Elijah Wong, who tries to put together basically a motley crew of staff personnel to fly her starship. So she wants to basically get to the originators of this message, so the people who originally sent this message. So she puts together this motley crew of misfits to help her get to her destination. The third part is her coming, and I think they actually get what's the word? They get captured by these pirates, is a best way to describe them, on this rather large ship. And it's all about Elijah and the crew using Babel-17 to get out of some pretty tight situations when they're faced with the invading force or the invaders. The fourth part of the book is her and her relationship with one of the characters in the book, in a character known as Butcher. And what's interesting about the Butcher is that the Butcher doesn't use any pronouns. And it's not so much that he doesn't use any pronouns, but he has no concept of pronouns like me, I, you, they, he, him. So it's completely alien to him and his language. And the fifth part is really where the story unfolds, and I won't go into the fifth part of the book because it'll be a bit of a spoiler. But really what Babel-17 really deals with is the concept of linguistic relativity. And that's a theory that supposes that a person's or a group of people, a nation's language will affect the way they see reality and the perception of reality in the world. And it's a really interesting concept, and that's where the book's core theme really resides, around the concept of language. And it doesn't take Roger long at all to realize that not only is Babel-17 a language, but it's language weaponized. So the language itself becomes a weapon. And so some really interesting stuff, especially if you're into linguistics and the study of language and the study of language structure. I think this would appeal to you. It's a really interesting book in that regards. Now, the book is also great. It's a 1966 novel, and unfortunately, I think it has aged, especially when it comes to some of the dialogue. And it's starting to show its age. And it's not just because the book was written in 1966, because as we'll see in a couple of weeks, I'm actually currently reading a book by Alfred Bester, and I'll leave it at that, which was written a decade earlier than this book, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as dated as Babel-17. So it's not the mere fact that it was written in 1966 that makes it seem dated, but I think it's its use of language. It's also some of the concepts of some of the technologies that are used within the novel that for me seem a bit outdated. So I talked a bit about this motley crew, and one of the interesting things about the motley crew is that there's this concept of these corporate beings, to talk about some of the science fiction themes of the book that are quite interesting. So there are these corporate beings, they're basically humans that have died, but this corporate state has been captured, and it can be used to fly these spaceships or starships, which require very quick reflexes, quick thinking. So these corporate beings are actually being used to fly aircraft. And to go back to how this book is dated, one of the in a search for a crew, she recruits a customs officer to help her get all the paperwork basically done so she can get her crew legally acquired. And what we find is that this customs officer is actually conned by this corporate being. And it's not until he goes back to talk with the rest of the crew that they sort of highlight the fact, hey dude, you've just been conned. And what's sort of funny is that you got this parody, where almost an oxymoron, where you have this starship capability with these corporate beings, but when they con someone, the comment back to the customs officer is, hey, check your billfold, see how much money he's gained from you. So just that concept where, we're talking starships, these corporate beings, but we're still carrying around wallets. So, I can't see personally that in a starship era where we're flying faster than light speed, we'll still be carrying wallets. But you never know, right? Maybe the good old leather wallet will make a comeback, and someone who watched this video somewhere in history and say, hey, didn't that guy get it completely wrong? Wallets are all to go. But they did get some things right. So just to get back to the plot for a moment, there's a part in the book where Roger realizes that her ship is also starting to get under attack. Basically, there's acts of sabotage happening on the ship. And they actually refer to fixing one of the parts that's been sabotaged by printing a new part. So some of the technology I think is very realistic and very likely to be a real thing somewhere down the track. So look, the book is an interesting book, interesting concept. They do talk about some interesting sci-fi concepts as well, but I think the book's highlight is really the linguistics study more than anything. And I think it can really be seen as a linguistic relativity study and a thought experiment around how does language affect individuals, how would a society look like where language is weaponized. So in that, I think it's a pretty worthy book and a very good read. But unfortunately, for me, it just lacked in many areas as well, if I can be completely honest and transparent here. The novel, I enjoyed the first two parts of the book, but there are sections that I thought were rather weak and didn't quite flow as nicely. I think the choice of language, I know, it was just a bit disparate for me. I didn't find myself really just getting into the narrative of the book. And it's really a thing around some of the characters. I think some of the characters were quite cliche. They were pretty shallow characters. I mean, Raja Wong is a strong female character, but even she, I think, was a bit cliche in her strength. So there was nothing about her that sort of, I don't know, to me she just seemed to be this reality TV star who lacked substance. I may be alone in my view, but that's just my personal experience and what I saw in the book. The other thing that I really think let the book down is the ending. Now, I don't know, it almost feels like Samuel R Delany was on a time limit, or like some high school students, their essays were word count limited, because the ending sort of seems rushed together. It just feels like there was no build up. It was quite obvious from the beginning, I think, at least in my view, what was happening and what how Babel-17 was being used. And I don't know, it seemed rushed to me. It seemed like, I got to get this book done. Let's just finish it off. And it just didn't gel with me. I just didn't enjoy the ending of the book at all. But it's not to take it away, right? I'm being very critical in my observations of the book, because the book is definitely a worthy Nebula award-winning book. It's a great novel, great concepts, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that just love this book. And I did enjoy it. I do recommend the book as well. The other thing that sort of wrecked it for me right at the beginning was when the general was so quick just to hand over all this top secret intelligence stuff to Raja Wong with no question, and she was then free to go out and gather this crew and take on what she's learned and the actual Babel-17 code and all its messages, and just go away and do whatever she wanted with it. I just couldn't see that happening in any reality, science fiction or fiction, or non-fiction. So I don't know, it sort of left and it happened early on, and it was just, for me, it was a really big obstacle for me to get over, for me to enjoy the book. Now, I first read this book, it would have been 22, 23 years ago. And I've got to say, the book is memorable in the sense, I guess, what have I forgotten and what have I not forgotten about Babel-17? It's a great title, Babel-17. I always remembered it because of, the Tower of Babel and discommunication and the breakdown of language. So the title itself always stuck in my head, and I could always brief someone. If someone said, what's Babel-17 about? What I remembered vividly and quite clearly is, Babel-17 is about linguistic relativity and language basically being weaponized. So that theme is loud and strong within the book, and one that is memorable and one that is worthy alone of reading. But all the characters for me were forgettable. The plot itself was forgettable. The ending for me was atrocious and more than forgettable. It was terrible. But I do still recommend the book. So who would I recommend this book? I say I recommend it, but who would I recommend it to? I wouldn't recommend it to new sci-fi readers. I just think there are so many better books out there to get started on a science fiction journal. I would recommend it to someone who's interested in linguistics and the study of language. I think you'll find this book rather interesting in that concept, and how, language may be weaponized in a fictional sense and what the outcomes of that may be. I think there's really good elements of exploration and thought experiment in that. I would also recommend it to all serious science fiction readers. If you want to say, hey, I'm a hardcore science fiction reader, then I highly recommend Babel-17. And it's a worthy book, right? Like, it's a book that deserves to be in anyone's top 20, top 10 list. And this again is my personal view, and this will be my personal channel. I'm happy for you guys to critique and share your thoughts in the comments. But that's where I'm standing today. I've read it. I read it, like I said, 22, 23 years ago for the first time. I reread it now, and you know, when I go back in my head around the books that I've enjoyed over the years, Babel-17 doesn't come to mind, which will be rather interesting to see how it rates on the sci-fi ladder. But I will go as far as to say it's by far not the worst book you can actually read, and it's a good book, and you will enjoy it. There's certain elements in the book that I'm sure you'll enjoy, and it hasn't won a Nebula for absolutely no reason. So it's a very, very interesting book and a very worthy Nebula winner. I've put myself in this difficult position where I need to rank these things, and I guess that's why I'm being overcritical in a lot of ways. So look, yes, 1966 Nebula award-winning book. The plot, I think, lacks something. I think the characters lack something. I think the concept of linguistic relativity is a strong one, and one alone that makes a book worthwhile reading. So back to the Sci-Fi Shed ladder for yet another difficult decision. So just for a quick recap, we have Way Station by Clifford Simak, which won the Hugo in 1964, still leading the charge, followed by To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer, which won the Hugo in 1972, followed by a brilliant book In the Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin that won the Hugo and the Nebula in 1970. And last but not least, Flowers for Algernon that won the Nebula in 1966, which it shared with Babel-17. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these two go head to head. So let's make this decision. So is Babel-17 better than Way Station? I don't think it is. It just doesn't give you that sense of wonder and awe that you get with Way Station, at least that I get when I read Way Station. So I don't think it's better than Way Station. I don't think it's better than To Your Scattered Bodies Go. I think Philip Jose just did an awesome job of mixing those fictional and non-fictional characters to make what is a very memorable book. And you just don't forget those characters, and you don't forget the plot, which is, you know, not more, I can't say that for Babel-17. Is it better than The Left Hand of Darkness? No way. The Left Hand of Darkness is just a wonderfully written novel, and sometimes I wonder if that book should really rank higher. And the only reason it doesn't for me is because, like I said, it was 25 years between rereads for me, and it read like a brand new book when I read Left Hand of Darkness. There wasn't much I could remember at all. So it didn't, for me, it didn't pass the test of time. I just forgot about that novel. So it'd be interesting to see if I ever do this tally again in another 10 years where it would rate, because it really is a wonderful book, and it's not, definitely Babel-17 is not better. Is it better than Flowers for Algernon, the novel? No. So if these two were to go head to head, there's no way I can rank Babel-17 over Flowers for Algernon, because like I said, Flowers for Algernon is a wonderful book, a brilliant book, and the only reason it ranks where it does on my Sci-Fi Shed ladder is because I just couldn't get past of just how good the short story was, and in some ways the novel actually wrecked it for me. So Babel-17, yeah, nah, not better than Flowers for Algernon, and it'll sit now right there at the bottom of our ladder board at the moment, but I don't think it'll remain there. Like I said, there's some very strong things in Babel-17. The, you know, linguistic relativity theme that it deals with alone is worth reading. It's a brilliant book and a great thought experiment into the structure of language and language being weaponized, and that alone, I think, it deserves a Nebula award-winning book, and it deserves to have co-won it with Flowers for Algernon. If Samuel had spent a lot more, in my humble opinion, if he had spent a lot more time developing his plot and developing his characters, I think this book would be pretty high up there. It's a great book. So yeah, there you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts, like always, as to where you would rank these books if you've read them. And I really don't want to dissuade you from reading the book. It is a great book and definitely worthy of a Nebula Award winner. And I've said it many times on this channel already, and I'll continue saying it. Every single one of these books is an award-winning book and deserves to be on anyone's top 10. This is where I'm sitting today. I'd love to see where you would rank it, and I'll see you next time in the Sci-Fi Shed.